So here I am at the Sabarmati Ashram, and this itself is now part of the original complex of the Sabarmati Ashram. In the previous video, I was speaking really from the museum, and we'll return to that because it's much quieter there. But I want to start first with this. We're not going to get an overview of the entire ashram because my principal ambition here is not really to give you a sense of the architecture of this place, although it is a very beautiful and serene place. The aim rather is to, as I said, discuss some of the aspects of life in the ashram itself. And I want to just begin with this building over there, that hut over there, which is called the Vinoba Mira Kuti. Now let me explain at some length what that name signifies. So this is where Vinoba Bhave stayed between 1919 and 1921. Some texts mention 1918 to 21. The director of the Sabarmati Ashram at the present moment, I just had a conversation with him earlier in the day, and he mentioned 1919 to 21, but some texts mention 1918. It's really quite immaterial. It only points to the fact that we are still not certain about some very elementary things sometimes. But Vinoba stayed there, and Vinoba is known to many people as one of Gandhi's closest followers or disciples. There are some cutting remarks, absolutely scathing assessment of Vinoba's life in V.S. Naipaul's book, India Wounded Civilization. That's the occasion for another talk altogether. But the important thing is that Vinoba stayed here for 2 years, and Vinoba was a person who was handpicked by Gandhi in 1942 at the time of the Quit India movement to initiate a new round of civil disobedience. This hut subsequently came to be occupied by Mirabehn, and I'd like to say something about her, a delightful story about Mirabehn. So Mirabehn is the daughter of an English admiral. Her English name was Madeleine Slade. And everything that I'm going to say here comes largely from a single book called A Spirit's Pilgrimage, which is her autobiography. Right? Mirabehn, or Madeleine Slade as she was known when she was in her previous incarnation, when she was a young woman, was a woman who grew up in a very affluent household. As I pointed out, she is a daughter of an English admiral, so she grew up in very luxurious circumstances. But she had a childhood love for Beethoven, for the music of Beethoven. She was a pianist herself. And she wrote a letter to Romain Rolland, who was known in Europe as one of Beethoven's biographers. He was also known as a novelist. In fact, he went on to win the Nobel Prize for literature. And unknown to most people, he was also a biographer of Ramakrishna Paramahans, Swami Vivekananda, and Mohandas Gandhi. In fact, one of the first biographies written in Europe of Gandhi was written by Romain Rolland, and it's translated into English with the title the Man Who Became One with the Universal, something along those lines. So she wrote a letter to Romain Rolland saying that I'm absolutely enchanted by the music of Beethoven. You are the greatest living authority on him. I'd like to seek an audience with you. And so she goes and visits him. He was living, I think, in Switzerland at that time. And so Romain Rolland listens to her very patiently. There's this young woman before him, and she's saying that she's absolutely enchanted with Beethoven. And so he asks her, well, what is it about Beethoven's music and that really captivates you? And she says, well, Beethoven is the one who became one with the universal. And Romain Rolland says to her, you know, if you're looking for a person who became one with the universal, why don't you turn your attention to someone who's living rather than someone who's been dead for 100 years or more? And so she says, who might this person be that you're thinking of? And he says, well, there's this man, rather short height, brown skinned, and he's sometimes known as a fakir, a holy man, and he lives in India, and his name is Mohandas Gandhi. And I suggest you read a little bit about him. And so he gives her a copy of his biography of Gandhi, points her attention to a few other sources. She goes back home to England, reads this, and is absolutely captivated by what she reads about Gandhi. So she writes a letter to Gandhi saying, you know, revered Mahatma Ji, because he was already known as a Mahatma at this point in time, I'd like to devote the rest of my life to you. I'd like to come and live in the ashram, and I'd like to devote the rest of my life in service to you. Because you are someone who, to me, represents the noblest ideas of humankind, and moreover, you have become one who has become absorbed into the universal. And so Gandhi's now view was always never discourage someone from the pursuits that they're genuinely interested in, but at the same time, you have to make sure that they have their feet on the ground. That is, that they're being somewhat realistic. So he writes to her saying, you know, dear Miss Slade, you probably are not familiar with the very difficult circumstances under which people have to lead their lives in the ashram. Right? That here, there are no luxuries whatsoever. You'll be sleeping basically on the floor. You'll have to clean the toilets like everyone else. You'll have to work in the kitchen. There are no servants here. Right? Nothing of that sort. It's going to be a rather taxing, demanding life, you know. I don't want to discourage you, but what I suggest is that you first practice an abstemious lifestyle for 1 year, wherever you are. And then if at the end of that period, you still feel, still is the crucial word here, you still feel inclined to join me, right, and render service to me, and more importantly to the Indian nation and to the struggle for self-determination, I'll be happy to welcome you, right, to the ashram. So Madeleine Slade tells you in her autobiography that she gets this letter. She is absolutely elated because Gandhi hasn't turned her down, but he has said, I want you to practice a life of abstemiousness for 1 year. So what does she do? She basically tells her mother, I want all the furniture removed from my room. I want the mattress removed. I'm going to be eating only vegetarian food henceforth. I want to lead a very Spartan lifestyle. Now our parents get extremely disturbed and anxious. Understandably so. They think, you know, their daughter has somewhat gone mad. You know, that she's lost her wits. She doesn't have her wits about her. She's basically someone who has become entirely irrational to their way of thinking. But she's quite firm in her ideas. So the furniture, the servants are summoned, the furniture is removed, she starts sleeping on the floor. There's a separate set of meals prepared for her now. Very simple meals, vegetarian, hardly any spices, a lot of fruits. And she starts dressing simply. She dispenses with the servants, does all the work around the house by herself. And at the end of the 1 year, that first year, she writes to Gandhi saying, I think I'm ready to come. I have followed a very abstemious lifestyle. And Gandhi says, if you think you're ready, come. We'll receive you. She arrives in Ahmedabad at the train station. Sardar Patel is sent to receive her. He brings her to the ashram. This is where he brings her. And there is this wonderful, priceless, you have to have a sense of humor, of course, to read that description, priceless description that she furnishes of what happened the day that she arrived. So she arrives there, she's escorted to her room. That would have been this hut here, the Vinova Mira Kutir. She's escorted there, and she is given a bowl of water. She freshens up, she rests a bit, and then she is escorted to this building right here. This is the Hriday Kunj. This is the back side of it that we're seeing here. This is where Gandhi, of course not all by himself, there were a number of other people who stayed here, of course, as well, including Kasturba and many others, but not Madan Lal Gandhi. Madan Lal was the nephew of Gandhi, and he became the manager, and he was the manager of the Sabarmati Ashram until 1928 when he passed away, and his role was then taken over by Chakhanlal Joshi. But let's continue with the story of Mira. So this is where Mohandas Gandhi, Bapu, is staying, Hriday Kunj, and Mira is brought in to see him. Right? She is ushered into his presence. So what does she say? She says that she was brought here, she was brought into Gandhi's presence, and then she says all she can remember is that she saw a halo of light. A halo of light. So Gandhi was bathed in this halo, and so she walks up to him, seeks his blessings, and as is quite common in our tradition, he puts his hand on her head, gives his Ashirvad, his blessings to her, and says, "You shall be like my daughter." And then he gives her a new name, Mirabehn, of course inspired by the story of Mirabhai, the great Bhakti poet, the great devotee of Krishna. Right? So that's this building here, Vinoba Mira Kutir, where Mirabehn stayed. In fact, after the sword march as well, Gandhi himself never returned to the Sabarmati Ashram, but she did continue to stay here for some period of time. Then, of course, she moved to Sevagram as well, and we know that subsequent to Gandhi's death, Mira Bhan didn't return to Europe. She actually went to the Himalayas, where she continued doing social work. And then eventually, in the last phase of her life, she does return to Europe for good. That's another story for another time. Now, what I wish to add here is the following. This is, I think, the most important part of the ashram life. I think that this is what I think is most central to understanding the spirit of this ashram. And this is what we might describe as the ashram observances. So there is even a little book called Ashram Observances, which tells you about what are the kinds of practices, spiritual practices and practices of everyday life that were crucial to the development of a community at Sabarmati. Okay? So at one point, there were perhaps as many as 500 people living here. Some of them living for very short periods of time, because Sabarmati by the 1920s, ashram had also become an important place for the training of khadi workers, people involved in spinning and weaving and dyeing. And so there might have been as many as 500 people, but the people who stayed for long term, that is those who were inmates of the ashram for good, okay, and who stayed in some of the adjoining buildings. So there's Hriday Kunj here, there's obviously the Vinoba Mira Kutir, and on that side over there, there is the Magan Nivas. Magan Nivas is the building named after Magan Lal, whom I've already mentioned was the nephew of Gandhi, who expired in 1928. But there was also a building called Nandini, which is also the other side here. And Nandini is where some of the most eminent visitors who came to the ashram were housed. This is where they stayed, sometimes for a day or so, sometimes for a substantially longer period of time, right? So the ashram was a very vibrant community where there was, we can't speak of a gender division of labor here, because Men and women equally have to clean their own toilets. Essentially, they have to look after their own needs. There is a communal kitchen. The meals, of course, are all vegetarian, entirely vegetarian. There's quite a lot of bird life here. Even today, we just saw a peacock going by a couple of minutes ago over here. And there was animal husbandry. There is a cattle shed. There is farming. Lots of the vegetables that are consumed at this ashram are in fact grown right here on the premises. Right? So this is a working community in every sense of the term. But the ashram observances have to do with the vows. So Gandhi instituted 11 vows that had to be taken by everyone. I'm not sure I remember all of them, but the first 5 are from Patanjali's. They are what Patanjali described as the yamas, the 5 principal vows of things that you have to observe. And those 5 vows are the vows of ahimsa, that is non-violence. And we have to bear in mind that ahimsa, the vow of ahimsa means not simply now resisting someone non-violently, not at all. In fact, the fact that you take a vow of ahimsa should suggest the far more capacious meaning that Gandhi attached to it, that non-violence is in fact a way of living, a way of being in this world, the way in which one actually lives out one's life, right? And sometimes, and Gandhi himself, of course, has written voluminously on this, sometimes you can think of ahimsa as the means, and you can then think of satya, which is the other principal vow among the 5 yamas, right? What is satya? Truth. Satya is the end. I think the relationship, of course, in Gandhi's own mind between means and end was far more complicated, but sometimes he describes ahimsa as the means and satya as the end. What are the other 5 principal vows? So we have satya, ahimsa, brahmacharya, celibacy, right? Brahmacharya also, of course, meant closeness to God. So doing things will bring you closer to God, so to speak. That is conducting your life in a way which embraces certain principles of purity. And then there is apigraha, non-possession, not being possessive about things, renouncing things, right? Not being part of the acquisitive society, right? And then there's the vow of asatya, which is non-stealing. And here Gandhi's interpretation is again far more capacious, because non-stealing simply doesn't mean, right, abstention from theft, right? Because what it means to conduct, to engage in an act of theft is far more complicated than one might like to believe, and far more unsettling for almost every human being, at least in the way in which Gandhi thinks of this, right? Let's take an illustration. So Gandhi himself says that if you, let's take myself as an example, eat far more than what you need, that's a form of theft, right? So theft is not simply, stealing someone's money or stealing someone's possession. It means having far more than what you need, whether it be food or it be any other thing in life, right? That's a vow. And so these are the 5 vows that you have to begin with, and then Gandhi is going to add 6 more vows to that. That makes a total of 11 vows. And what are the other 6 vows? So among the other 6 vows is, for example, working towards the eradication of untouchability, right? So Gandhi is going to expound on each of these vows at very considerable length. All of these vows are going to be vows that every ashram inmate is bound to observe. And this is where we get into the idea of ashram observances. As I've said, in the Gandhian literature, there is a ample description in innumerable places of these vows, right? That Gandhi is speaking on. And of course, the vows also include such things as bread labor. So some of this goes back, that is to say, physical manual labor. Because here what Gandhi was seeking to do was to break down, as I pointed out in my earlier video, break down that distinction between physical or manual labor, which is still looked down upon in India. I think it's safe to say that from at least the standpoint of the people who are part of the middle class and part of the upper class, physical labor is still associated largely with the lower castes. All right. There are a great many people who don't like to engage in physical labor. From their standpoint, there is a distinction to be made between what we might call the work of the mind, which is not to say that those who are not doing physical labor are really doing the work of the mind. There's a serious question about whether they're doing any kind of labor as such, particularly, the labor of the mind. Right? Because then we'd have to really get into an entire discussion of what is meant by thought, what is meant by reflection, what is meant by ratiocination. But I think the distinction here is clear enough in the sense that Gandhi is someone who is very clear that no life can be considered self-respecting if it doesn't include a component of physical labor. That we should know where we get the food from that we put on the table, and we should have some idea of the work of the hands. So Gandhi has what we can describe a kind of a philosophy of the hands as well, and of course we have to understand that spinning and weaving is partly associated with that. It has its own complex ecology, but has some relationship to physical labor, to the work of the hands, and so on. So that is a set of the ashram observances. And on a final concluding note, it is important to say that these ashram observances are portable, by which I mean that you could move outside the ashram, you could be traveling, and yet if these observances are portable, it means that you have to still observe these vows, because they have no particular physical relationship as such to the idea of the ashram. Here they do. The ashram is the community in which these vows take on a life of their own, we might say. But nevertheless, these ashram observances are portable in the sense that the ashram itself was portable. That if you lead a certain kind of lifestyle that is commensurate with the vows and commensurate with the spirit of the ashram, you have, in a manner of speaking, taken the ashram with you. Right? And on this note, I conclude.